Well, we're going to be looking at Acts chapter 17. And this is, of course, Paul is on his second missionary journey, and he's in the midst of that. And in chapter 17, it talks about three locations that he visits: Thessalonica, Berea, and Athens. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Athens, a lot of similarities between his visit to all three, but especially between Thessalonica and Berea, and then some very interesting aspects to his visit to Athens. I'm going to read the whole chapter for you, but we'll do it in parts, and I'll explain some things and comment as we go through the text. When Paul and his companions had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a Jewish synagogue. As was his custom, Paul went into the synagogue, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that the Messiah had to suffer and rise from the dead. "This Jesus I am proclaiming to you is the Messiah," he said. Some of the Jews were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a large number of God-fearing Greeks and quite a few prominent women. But other Jews were jealous, so they rounded up some bad characters from the marketplace, formed a mob, and started a riot in the city. They rushed to Jason's house in search of Paul and Silas in order to bring them out to the crowd. But when they did not find them, they dragged Jason and some other believers before the city officials, shouting, "These men who have caused trouble all over the world have now come here, and Jason has welcomed them into his house. They are all defying Caesar's decrees, saying that there is another king, one called Jesus." When they heard this, the crowd and the city officials were thrown into turmoil. Then they made Jason and the others post bond and let them go. As soon as it was night, the believers sent Paul and Silas away to Berea. On arriving there, they went to the Jewish synagogue. Now the Berean Jews were of more noble character than those in Thessalonica, for they received the message with great eagerness and examined the Scriptures every day to see if what Paul said was true. As a result, many of them believed, as did also a number of prominent Greek women and many Greek men. But when the Jews in Thessalonica learned that Paul was preaching the word of God at Berea, some of them went there too, agitating the crowds and stirring them up. The believers immediately sent Paul to the coast, but Silas and Timothy stayed at Berea. Those who escorted Paul brought him to Athens, and then left with instructions for Silas and Timothy to join him as soon as possible. Now let's consider some of the things that we see in these first two towns, in Thessalonica and Berea. Notice in both, and this will be true in Athens also, Paul goes to the synagogue first. Why do you think he goes to the synagogue first? Well, on one level at least, you might say he's expecting to find the most receptive people to the gospel there. These are people who are interested in God. These are Greeks who are God-fearing people. And so he seemingly goes, or at least one reason why he goes there, and this proves to be true, he finds them to be most receptive. Now, on one hand, I think it's a little surprising to me, because the Jews in general rejected Jesus, and so you might expect that he would find a very hostile audience in the synagogues. But in fact, remember, Jesus is, as Paul says, this is not a separate religion that he's preaching here, but he's showing them from the scriptures, which we'll see, or I'll mention in just a moment, that Jesus is the Messiah. He is the Messiah. He is the one. Just a little aside there. I get out a lot, and I try to interact with people a lot. And I must admit that I rarely encounter anybody who is what I would describe as, the term is used here, a God-fearing person. And by that I mean someone who is interested in talking about, thinking about things like purpose in life and meaning in life and God and what we believe about, what you believe about God and why you believe that. And so it makes sense to me that Paul would say, I'm looking for people who are looking for God, who are willing to think about things on a deeper level. The second thing that you see in his visits here is that, amazingly, he reasons from the scriptures. Now, I say amazingly because you see he's appealing to the mind, right? He's reasoning with them. And again, this is amazing. Now, it's in more recent history this is the case. It has been for centuries the case that all the intellectuals came through the church and were part of Christianity. And it's only more in the last 150 years, or perhaps since the Age of Reason, a few hundred years, that Christianity has been portrayed as being mindless, and of course there's a lot of things culturally that have happened, and Christians haven't been the most have fostered this notion. But generally in our culture, Christianity, religion in general, is portrayed more and more often as being very mindless, as just emotion. There's no basis in science or fact, and so it's very anti-intellectual. And I want you to see that, at least here, you see that it's very intellectual. And you'll see that as we go on, and his interaction you'll see his interaction in Athens, where he's talking with some of the philosophers of the day. So he appeals to the mind, and what matters is truth. What matters is truth. And I say that with great emphasis because in our culture, it is extremely difficult for you not to think of religion and Jesus and God in terms other than practicality and relevance. What will he do for me? How is he interacting with me? That's what matters. And so most of the people I interact with, most of the people you interact with, they really don't care what the scriptures say. They don't care what the Bible says. Increasingly, Christians know very little about the Bible. What matters is what works for me. What works. So to the degree that, the Bible gives me something that works, I'm interested in it. But I'm not interested in truth. And we'll get on this, as we go on, we'll see that this is the case also in Athens, because there's this fundamental premise in our society that Christianity, religion, has nothing to do with truth. It's in your head. It's what you make up. It's what works for you. That's why we shouldn't impose it on others. Because it's your opinion. It's what you like. Your taste in food or wine or whatever. That's what religion is. But here, the issue is, what is true? You see, the Scriptures are believed to be truth, and they testify to God's Messiah. And the question is Jesus fulfilling the prophecies that identify him as the Messiah? Isn't it interesting that it doesn't say that Paul went and told them about the good teachings of Jesus, about how we should love one another, or, right? No, nothing about that. It's about what? His suffering and his resurrection. His suffering and death and his resurrection. Because those were the two stumbling blocks back then. The Jews saying Jesus was cursed by God, if anything. He died on a cross. And then questions about the resurrection. Did he really rise? And so here you see Paul reasoning from the Scriptures and testifying to the fact that the Messiah, according to the Scriptures, will suffer, or was to suffer, and would be raised from the dead. And Jesus did both of those things. Both of those things are true in Jesus. So the message, again, is not, oh, well, what are your needs? What do you want? How could your life be better, or whatever? No, the issue is the truth and God's Messiah. And that's what Paul is preaching. That is what Paul is saying to him. He's not taking a poll. He's not seeker sensitive. He's not saying, what do you want to hear? Here's the truth. Here's what you need to hear. This is what really matters. And we'll see that as we go on. And then lastly, notice the response. It wasn't 100%. There were some, a minority, who followed Paul and Silas, who believed what Paul said. But there were many more who rejected the message that Paul had brought, and not only just turned and walked away from it, said we don't want to hear this, but persecuted him and his companions, right? Drove them out of town, got people riled up somehow about this, and we're starting riots. Okay, let's go on with the text. While Paul was waiting for them, his companions, Silas and Timothy, in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. Now let me pause again. Okay, so notice, as was his custom, as he did in Thessalonica and in Berea, Paul goes to the synagogue and preaches to the God-fearing Greeks and Jews who are there. And he reasons with them from the Scriptures. But it also tells us that he sees in the city idols, and he is greatly distressed because of them. And so not only does he bring his message, not only does he talk about Jesus with the God-fearing Jews and Greeks at the synagogue, but also with whoever is in the marketplace. Whoever is in the marketplace. Now, the notable thing about this is, you see that Paul believes that what he is preaching, the message that he has, Jesus himself, this is the truth again. And Jesus, as the Messiah, is a universal need. He is necessary and he is sufficient, not just for some, not just for those who he works for. Paul happens to like it and it works for him, and so he's going to sell it to others. No. It's like in Acts 4:12. There is no other name given to men by which we must be saved. It's not just my personal Jesus, my personal God, what, as I've said now multiple times, what works for me. No. This is the truth. and it is applicable, and it is necessary for all people. Now, if you read this generally, this just little section about Paul's interaction, or how Paul responds to his visit to Athens, by people who are in the know, they would find this extremely offensive. Here is Paul imposing his religion on other people, his beliefs, his way of living, which is a very egocentric mentality. He's ignorant of other cultures. Instead, we should go to a place like this. Can you imagine? I think what we would expect to see if this was on a National Geographic, tour thing is, Paul goes to Athens and he sees all of the idols and the places of worship that they have, and he admires them. He affirms them. He appreciates different cultures. But he doesn't do that, right? No. He sees them as being wrong, as being dangerous, as being deadly. He sees that there is one name by which we must be saved. But on the surface, the way our culture, has influenced us, what he does is offensive because religion is just personal. It's just for you. So as long as, as I was saying the other, a week ago or so, I'm in the marketplace and I'm listening to two people have a conversation about a third person, a Christian. And very typically the one it's okay. He's one of those born again Christians, or he's, very religious. And the typical, I don't mind that as long as they keep it to themselves. I don't mind that as long as they keep it to themselves. I was just telling somebody this story. Many years ago, when I had first become a Christian, I was doing volunteer work in a hospice. It was a Catholic hospice, and back then, they didn't call it a hospice. It was just a home, but it was a hospice. The only patients were there were people who, for the most part, had cancer, but who were very close to death. Now, in this Catholic cancer home, it was run by nuns, and there was one monk, one friar who also worked there, and then there was me. So there was only two men, and most of, at least the floor that I worked on, the patients, maybe there were 40 men on this floor. The patients I worked with, they were all men, and it was difficult for the nuns because when they had to do basic patient care with these men, they're big and the nuns are not big, and it's hard. So they really appreciated having someone like me who could come and do this, give bed baths and things. So I volunteered there, and one of the things I noticed was families who would come to visit and the awkwardness that they would sense. They wouldn't know what to talk about with grandpa or their father or whatever, and because everybody knows, the elephant in the room is they're dying. They're very close to death. But nobody wants to talk about it. Because, what would we say anyways? So they talk about the weather, and they talk about, this was in Cleveland, how the Cleveland Indians are doing. And so when I would bathe these men or feed these men, many of them couldn't even eat anymore, so I would just spoon feed them. I would talk with them about dying. And I found them to be very responsive. One day, the head nun called me into her office and she said, Dave, we really appreciate you, the hours you give here and your volunteering. But Dave, I understand that you're talking to these men about Jesus. And you can't be doing that. Now remember, this is a Catholic home, but you can't be doing that. I said, I can't be doing that? Is this a Catholic home? Yes, it is, but we're not affiliated with any denomination. We're non-religious. We are nuns that run, but anybody can come here, and so we don't talk about religion. Although every Friday they would have a priest go up and down the halls with a censer and stuff. But no, you can't talk about Jesus with these men. So I said to her this. I said, I think I know what it is to be offensive with people and to be pushy and to try to offend people. I said, I'm not doing that. I observe that these men are dying, and nobody will talk with them about death and what awaits them. But I will. And I talk with them about their fears and what they think is going to happen, and I listen to them. And I do share with them what I know to be true about Jesus and life in him. Now, if that is inappropriate, and you're telling me I can't do that, then that's fine. I understand, and I can no longer work here. But if I'm going to work here, then I'm going to continue to do that. And what do you think she said to me? Well, we really appreciate your help. So I don't want you to leave. But if you could just tone it down a little bit, if you could just, I said, yeah, no. Listen, I just want to emphasize, I understand, I know what it is to be offensive with people. I know, I have seen that, and that's not what I'm talking about. But I think we have to think about how our culture has affected our response to God, our belief in God, our understanding of Jesus Christ as the truth. One other question I want to raise for you here is, what does it look like to love God and to love people? If what I say I believe is really true, then what does it look like to love God and love people? And my contention is, it's what you see here in Paul. If I really believe that God is God, that this God who is worthy of singing blessing and honor and glory and power really exists, is the infinite being, that there is a day when we will all stand before him and have to answer to him and give an account to him, if these things are really true, then what does it look like to serve him, to love him? It looks like to obey him, to honor him, and to want to see him honored in the lives of everyone that he has created, because he is worthy of that. And I know that. When I talk to someone about Christ, about fearing God and knowing God, it's not to get a notch on my religious belt, nor is it primarily, so that to help them. It's that the Lamb who was slain might receive the glory that is due him. And we'll see as we go on here that that is what Paul is saying to the philosophers in Athens. That God might be glorified. Because he is worthy of that. That's what we just sang over and over again. You are worthy. Seeing blessing and honor and glory and power. Or as some of us have learned in the Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. May your name be honored. May your kingdom come. May your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Is that my desire all the time? Not just in my life, but in the people driving cars around me, the people in the restaurants around me, in all lives, in my children's lives, in my wife's lives. May your kingdom come and your will be done. And then secondly, what does it look like to love others? I told you that story, back when I was at the Air Force Academy and I was leaving the academy. Remember, I'm talking with a psychiatrist and he says to me, "Why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you leaving the academy? Why do you want to go, preach the gospel?" And the simple answer was this: because I really believe it's true. And the response of that psychiatrist was, then there's nothing wrong with you. If you really believe that's true, then your behavior is consistent with that. I'm not into the emotion and scaring people and all of this, but really, when we think about what we say we believe, how can I not have a burden for the people around me? I know this isn't popular, but judgment is coming. You and I are going to die. And so is everyone else, if the Lord doesn't return before that. And when we do, we have to stand before God and answer to Him. So what does it look like for me to care about the people I talk with at Panera or McDonald's or Burger King? Do I ever, in my culture, am I ever like Paul and look around and are greatly distressed by the idols that I see? Do you ever think, I try to build relationships with people, which comes very easy for me. I just try to love people, to show a little bit of, I like to go to this, I almost never am in my office. I go, as you all know, I go and work in places like Panera or McDonald's when they're open, or Burger King or whatever, and I go there every day, and I'm there for hours. And if you do that, you see that there are a lot of people who do the same thing. They might not there as long as I am, but they come there frequently because they want to have contact with people. Some don't, but a lot do. So I'll just say hello. Or sometimes people, I see you here all the time. People come up to me, I see you here all the time. I'm wondering what you're doing. You're working on that computer or whatever. You're working so hard. I'm just friendly with people. and they soak it up like a sponge does water. But the thing that grieves me is this. Like the day before yesterday, a man who I have developed a relationship with because I go to the same restaurant and he is there, and he has cancer. He's been getting treatment, both chemo and radiation therapy, and super friendly guy, very friendly with me. But whenever I talk with Dave, I think to myself, Dave, you're dying. I have a 45-minute conversation with him the other day about how to detail cars, about how smoking has changed in our culture, about UConn women's basketball, about the change in the neighborhood in West Haven, where he grew up. I'm very happy to talk about those things. But the whole time, I'm thinking, Dave, can I talk to you about God? Do you have any interest in that? Can I talk to you about meaning in life? What's going to happen when you die? You have cancer. You're 73 years old. Do you ever feel that way? Do you ever think, I wish, I'm looking for an opening, I'm praying? If I never talk with Dave, hey, about God, fine. I'm happy to just love this man. But do you ever look and see the idols around us? And does it greatly distress you? I thought, and please, but isn't it pathetic in a sense that we can be so caught up in the most trivial, meaningless things? Like we can have a 25, 30-minute conversation about the best way to clean wheels on a car, about the best wax to use on a car, about how do you clean the inside of a windshield. Really? But we can't talk 30 seconds about God. There is something dark and messed up about our culture. And it's no different than it has always been. Okay, let me move on with the text. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him, that is Paul, in the marketplace. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news, which is about Jesus and the resurrection. Let me just pause here in case you don't get to it. But as we go on, the resurrection here is not only the idea that Jesus was raised from the dead, but the idea that there is something beyond this life, that we will be raised from the dead, and that therefore there is a judgment day. That's what is in the thinking here when it talks about there is a resurrection, and you'll see that. It's not just, who would be against the resurrection? It means that we're going to live in heaven forever. Isn't that wonderful? No, because the way they understand the resurrection is accountability to a God, and there will be a judgment day. That's what they're seeing here. So what is this Epicurean and Stoic philosophy? Well, let me go quick here. The Epicurean philosophy comes from Epicurus around 300 BC in this area in Corinth. Let me read the definition that you can find on Wikipedia, and then I'll simplify it a little bit. The greatest good, it's a philosophy of life. It's a way of life. The greatest good was to seek modest, sustainable pleasure in the form of a state of tranquility and freedom from fear and the absence of bodily pain through knowledge of the workings of the world and limiting desires. Stoicism was founded by a guy named Zeno of Citium around the same time, 300 BC, defined as the development of self-control and fortitude as a means of overcoming destructive emotions. The philosophy holds that becoming a clear and unbiased thinker allows one to understand the universal reason. So let me be very simplified here. The Epicurean philosophy is moderate self-indulgence. Moderate indulgence. In some ways, that almost seems like an oxymoron, moderate indulgence, but that's what it is. It's essentially live a life of moderate indulgence. But Stoicism, which is really opposed to that, is no, self-denial is the way to go. Not pacifying your desires and suffering, trying to minimize suffering, but in order to face it head on and to deny it. Now, here are the things that they have in common. Both are knowledge-based. Both are really like self-help philosophies today. And when they talk about spirituality, it's a humanistic spirituality. So picture it all self-contained within humanity. There is nothing beyond humanity. There's nothing, in the theological term, transcendent. It's all immanent. It's just us. So there is no God above and outside. It's just humanism. And so the way to the best life, which they're asking, is through knowledge and through our own works, as best we can either control ourselves or indulge ourselves. And spirituality, if there is any, it's just to supplement, reinforce our own abilities to live. We are saturated in our culture with this philosophy of life, that there's really nothing outside of us, nothing transcendent. We're just all to ourselves. And so science and facts and trying to do the best you can and self-improvement and self-help, that's the only way to the best or any kind of life, at least for some. All self-contained. Okay, let me go on. Then they took him, Paul, and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean." All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship. I even found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God, to an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship. And this is what I am going to proclaim to you." Let's pause there. They are religious, many idols, they worship. But again, it is a very humanistic spirituality. and they enjoy entertaining ideas. So they have invited Paul. Why? Thinking that he has a new idea for us. So their thinking, as I said, in our own culture today is religion and God, spirituality, it's all the realm of ideas. It's all in our heads. And they are not truth seekers because they don't believe that there is any truth, which is also true in our culture today, or a factor in our culture today. And so enlightenment is just taking in many different ideas. What is the idea du jour? What is working for me today? What God will work for me today? It's very sophisticated and enlightened. And religion is very humanistic. I want to say that in our culture, in many ways, Christianity has become very humanistic. It's very oriented toward our feelings. God is very therapeutic. He loves us. He's concerned about us. Is there any sense of any holy God or transcendent God? Nope. He's my therapist. He's my helper. He's going to, he meets my needs. He's a God I can carry in my pocket. He's with me all the time. He's good to me. Me, me, me. Me, it's all about me. And then I form him to my liking and what works for me. It's interesting that Paul says, I was thinking about this morning in Romans 10 when he says, brothers, I can tell you that the Jews are zealous for their religion. They're earnest in their practice of their religion, but their focus, their direction is not based on knowledge. And as such, they're lost. It doesn't matter how religious a person is if they're wrong. So Paul comes into this and he says, I'm going to proclaim, i.e., I am going to be dogmatic. I'm not here to give you another idea. I am here to tell you the truth. And again, in our culture today, we see that, well, that's very offensive. That's very egocentric. That's very ignorant. That's mean-spirited or even evil. No, I'm going to tell you what it is, Paul says. Here's the truth. Okay, this is what he says. The God who made the world and everything in it is Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands, and he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. Why didn't he say, God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life? God who made the world and everything in it. Look at what he says here. God is primary. Man is secondary. We think and act and move as if we are primary and God is secondary. Because he is a matter of our own creating. That's what they're doing there. They're fashioning it in metal and stone and wood. We fashion mentally our gods and our idols. But we are primary, and they are subject to us. You see, Paul comes in and says, no. God is primary. He is the creator. He is the sustainer. And he is not a matter of human creation. They say, all gods are the same. All religions are equal. They're all our own creation and ideas. Let's move on. Now he's going to blow their minds. From one man. Obviously, it's Jesus, right? From one man, he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far away from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. And as some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. What is he saying? One man, Jesus Christ, the means through which this God, creator and sustainer, has worked and is working in this world. And he is sovereign in this world. He is not a clockmaker who created and then went off away from his creation, wound it up and let it go. No, he has come into his creation by a man through whom all of this is now working. He is sovereign over all people and all time and history. And everything in this world is working according to his purposes and his direction. And so this God who created, who works through this man who is in this world, is therefore a personal God who is near and who is benevolent, is personal, and is revealing himself to us and reaching out to us. Therefore, he says, and the intention of God is, it is only right so that we would seek him and reach out for him and find him, as Paul says. And so there is no excuse anymore for ignorance, for not knowing this, because of the man of the revelation of God in Jesus Christ. He goes on. We're almost done. Here he points out now the necessary response. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone. He is not something we have made, an image made by human design and skill. We are his offspring. He is primary. We are secondary. He is fundamental. We are tertiary. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commends all people everywhere to repent. Oh, man. Again, the truth, the applicability, all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. We have an obligation to God, Paul says. We are his offspring. He is primary. He made us. We are secondary. And he commands, as he rightfully can and does, everyone. He is the judge, and he will judge with justice, i.e., all of what I'm talking to you and our response to him is just and right and what he deserves. He has given us proof, Paul says, in Jesus. We must repent. We must give to God his rightful place. We must acknowledge him as God. We must believe the things that I have said and about Jesus and obey. And to ignore is to disobey. There is a resurrection and judgment is coming. Now remember earlier on in the text it said they love to think about things and talk about ideas and play with them. And do you see Paul saying, friends, a response is demanded. And be under no illusion that to ignore or walk away and say, I don't like that one, that you have escaped. You have responded. You have rejected, you have ignored, you have turned from the God who is reaching out to you. You have rejected the truth, or you have embraced the truth. But there's no escaping a response. Everyone responds. Do you see, when we think about sin, we think about sin as, well, sin is adultery, sin is lying, sin is stealing, sin is doing something that God said we shouldn't do, sin is hurting somebody else or whatever. Do you see what sin fundamentally is? This is very important when you're talking with other people. Because God can seem very trivial to people. I've had people say this to me. Why does God care who I sleep with? Why does God care about my sexual behavior? Really? Why does God care whether I tell a little lie or not? Is that how small your God is? He's up there with a little tote board because people see that's what sin is. He's got these laws and these rules. It comes across as very trivial, a very trivial God, when that's the view of sin. I find it very helpful to say to people, no, this is what sin is. Sin is not giving God his rightful place. That's what sin is. One form of not doing that is disobeying his laws. But don't reduce it to that. The heart of sin is rebellion against God. We say, no, I'm not going to bow the knee to you. I'm not going to believe in you. I'm not going to accept you as the truth. I'm going to live my own life. I'm going to ignore you. That's what sin is. It's not giving him his rightful place in our lives. Sin is denying the truth. It's refusing to submit to God as God. So how did they respond? And this is the end of the chapter. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered. Again, why would they sneer if it's just like, we're going to all go to heaven? Because they connect the resurrection with a justice, a judgment day, which is what Paul said. We will be raised to judgment. And some of them sneered. But others said, we want to hear you again on this subject. At that, Paul left the council. No indication that he ever returned. Some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. Among them were Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus, also a woman named Damaris, and a number of others.